What does it mean to have grit in an ongoing emergency? Think back over your life to a time you found the courage to act. I've been thinking a lot about grit, what it takes to stick to something even when the obstacles seem insurmountable and times are hard. Author and psychologist Angela Duckworth defines grit this way. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. I discovered my own grit when I was 27 years old and in love for the first time, head over heels with a woman I was certain I'd spend the rest of my life with. But because it was the first time in my adult life that I was experiencing sex and intimacy in the same relationship, I shut down sexually. I didn't know why. It just happened. When things got heated, I'd go numb and dissociate. My lover grew enraged at my withdrawal, and her rage triggered my first incest memory of my grandfather abusing me. The breaking through of that first memory led to a psychic emotional collapse so profound I was certain I would never get over it. I'd never survive the bombardment of flashbacks and body memories, the rejection of my mother who chose her dead father over her living daughter, the estrangement from my family of origin who insisted I was making up lies and who were demanding proof. I was cast out of the family I had idealized, lost in a sea of pain. 6 months later, I organized a party where I invited a dozen friends over, and in exchange for a home-cooked meal, I asked them to help me figure out what I should do with my life. I did a 15-minute presentation complete with flip charts about my skills and talents, work environments I hated, anything remotely corporate or rule-bound, clothing I refused to wear, suits, dresses, and nylons, as well as the things I loved to do, writing, interviewing people, being on the radio. Before I fed my friends, I had them fill out a 3-page questionnaire about how I might best use my talents and harness my drive into a new way of earning a living. I definitely didn't know what to do with my life, but I sure had a lot of chutzpah. My friend and former writing teacher, Ellen Bass, was at that party. The year before, she and a small women's collective had published the anthology I Never Told Anyone, Stories of Women Survivors of Child Sexual Abuse, which had cracked open a silence that was just starting to break. The book was doing well in trade paperback, and at my career party, Ellen told me that her publisher, Harper and Row, wanted her to write a sequel, a second book on incest, this one about healing. I told them I didn't want to do it, Ellen continued. I have too much on my plate. How about if I write it with you? I replied. What if you didn't have to do it alone? Ellen gave me a long look. Laura, if I was going to do it with anyone, I'd do it with you. I know you have the writing chops. Then she laughed. And you obviously have the drive. But I don't want to do it. But that conversation planted the seed. And for the next couple of months, I worked on Ellen. How about if I do all the interviews with the women, and you don't have to do anything for the first year? How about if I do all the parts you don't want to do? As is my nature, I was relentless. A few weeks later, a Hallmark card arrived in my San Francisco mailbox, Ellen's name on the return address. I ripped open the envelope and pulled out the card. The front was embossed with pastel balloons, and inside was a single word in cursive in Ellen's hand. Yes, I still have that card. And that's how the Courage to Heal was born. Throughout the 3.5 years it took us to write the book, I was racked with memories, devastated by grief, dissociated half the time, at war with my mother who was outraged that I was not only spouting lies, but now I was writing this hate book. Being ostracized from family gatherings and made invisible was gutting, but I never gave up. I kept sitting in the living room of incest survivor after incest survivor, cups of tea gone cold, asking them questions, watching the little wheels on my cassette tape turning round and round. How did you cope? I'd ask them. How did your mother react? Have you been able to have sex? When did you stop believing it was your fault? I asked every question, pressing my own heart. And at night, in my rented room in a flat near the corner of Haight and Masonic, I transcribed those interviews on my Mac 128 for hours, well into the middle of the night, long after I'd finished working the 3 part-time jobs that paid my rent. I edited those stories, sent them to Ellen for comments, and then sat down and edited them again. She and I met every couple of months for a few days at a time to brainstorm, write, read, edit. Every time I had a new memory or got another hateful call from my mother, I'd be shredded. It took me weeks to recover, but I never stopped working on the book. I was a workhorse, and the book was my salvation. It's hard for me now to go back there in my mind's eye. 40 years ago, I was 28, the age my youngest daughter is now. I felt broken and devastated, yet a fierce determination rose up through my core. Nothing was going to stop me. Nothing was going to stop us. I had grit. Throughout those years of incessant labor, I was sure The Courage to Heal would never be published. Ellen and I had an agent, an editor, and a book contract, yes, but I was certain our book was too radical, too extreme. We were taking on the patriarchy. We were taking on the subjugation of women. We were empowering women to rise. We were even out as lesbians. There was no way Harper and Row was going along with this. Once they saw the final manuscript, they were going to pull the plug. But they didn't pull the plug. And after the first edition made its way out into the world, the book caught fire. As I often said to people in those years, I gained the world, but I lost my family. Despite the devastation in my personal life, my mission never wavered. I stood on stages in front of roomfuls of women who'd come on planes and buses, cross state lines. They stood there with tattered copies of The Courage to Heal and waited in line for hours for me to sign them. I've thought a lot lately about that shattered, heartbroken, grieving, anguished young woman. How she didn't give up. How she fought for the underdog. How she used her voice to inspire, to expose, to tell the truth, to challenge power. She is waking up inside me. Her voice is needed now. All our voices are needed now. This is the 0 hour. Okay, so now it's your turn to write. And here's your prompt. Describe a time in your life when you demonstrated true grit. It doesn't have to be dramatic or public like my story. It might have been a moment when quiet strength rose up inside you, something no one else even knew about, or a time you persisted and took determined action despite the obstacles you faced. Tell us about a time you demonstrated true grit. And here it is again. Describe a time in your life when you demonstrated true grit. It doesn't have to be dramatic or public like my story. It might have been a moment when quiet strength rose up inside you, something no one else even knew about, or a time you persisted and took determined action despite the obstacles you faced. Tell us about a time you demonstrated true grit. And as always, feel free to tell us about this time in your life in the comments.